when I posted this class on Facebook, there was somebody, I don't know why, but right away it was like, who is qualified to teach this class? And what are your qualifications to teach this? And I was like, you know what, I really thought about that, and I realized, you know what? I have to just tell you, I am not a PERT. In fact, not only am I not a PERT, I'm not even an expert. So I'm not a therapist, I don't have a PhD, you know, I don't have any qualifications whatsoever.
Okay, I do, so I'll compare.
Yeah, okay. So all I can tell you is I've been teaching Torah for close to 40 years. And I have some friends who are still sitting in classes after all of these years. And I have been a rabbi, although I do not refer to myself as a rabbi. I just refer to myself more as a rabbit, jumping all around different things. And I have, when you become a rabbi, or people think you are a rabbi, let's put it like that, people come over, they confide in you. And so you're like keeping a poker face going, that's very interesting. And meanwhile, you're like, whoa, this person's really out to lunch. But you have to maintain that rabbinical look of concern and interest. But what happens is you wind up with this awesome database that like someday you'd like to publish books about this stuff, but you can't, or at least you have to change the names. But you wind up with a lot of experience, and you kind of really learn a lot about a lot of stuff. So those are my credentials. You know, again, I'm not a PERT, and nor am I an expert. So what I've done tonight instead, because I am kind of superficial, I have created a very superficial class, and it's going to kind of be like tossing a rock on a pond, going over a lot of issues, which when I put this material together, and these 57 pages that we're going to do tonight were really already trimmed down because I realized each one of them, I'm just kidding, it was only 9 pages, but it's 16 points so I could see it. But it's, each one of these could be a class in itself. So I thought what I'll do is, this way you could like time in your little timer when to nod out, which people tend to do in classes. So this way you can like make sure you won't miss the good stuff. Here is what we're going to go over. I'm going to bring in tons of Talmudic sources because I am a Talmudic Viking. That's what I like to think of myself. And I believe that the Talmud is the OS, the operating system through which everything from Kabbalah to practical halacha to philosophy to simple daily life, it's all Talmud. And therefore, I believe that if each generation, if we can get back to the Talmudic sources and re-examine them, re-evaluate them, this is how we realign ourselves, when without that we can become appearingly very religious, but yet maybe potentially very astrayed from what the original idea that our grandparents and grandmothers were trying to give us through the Torah. So that's the idea here, is to see insights purely Talmudic. As my rabbi once said, he's a real rabbi, he once said, I didn't write this stuff, I'm not rewriting it, I'm just sharing it with you. So that's what this is about tonight. And here's like a list of subjects we're going to go through. It's going to start off with the concept of modesty and a definition of modesty that might be very different than we are used to. It's then going to jump quickly into another subject called porn, which probably nobody here is familiar with at all. And then that will make everybody sort of wake up, as it just did. Wait, use a 4-letter word. Now use another 4-letter word. And then from porn we're going to go to love. And then from love to love sickness. And then from love sickness, not necessarily that this equates, we're going to go to dating. And from dating to wedding. And from wedding to divorce. And then from divorce to marriage. And then from marriage to the last one, shalom bayit. Like shalom bayit, right? Or shalom bayit, right? So, that'll depend how the class goes, which way we're going to end that note. But that's what the approaches we're going to start on. And we're going to start with the concept of modesty, because unfortunately or fortunately, many people think that modesty is something which is all about the way a woman dresses. And that may be correct. In other words, woman's dress may be a subsection under modesty, but modesty is something way beyond that. In fact, if you really look carefully in the Talmud, you will see that modesty is also about the way a man dresses. And it's not just about the way a man dresses, it's about the way the man dresses modestly. In other words, what is the nature of like the black leather jacket with the beads and the bumps and the this and the that? Or it's really not a question of how the person is exposing a hairy chest or not exposing it. It's a question of the reflection, because a person's dress is the actual insight to the person's soul. I mentioned this actually in the last class. This is probably why nobody came back from the last class, all new faces. But in the last class I mentioned, if you see a naked body, okay, maybe it might be nice, perhaps, not most people in the world, but let's say you see a naked body, that's all you see is just a naked body. You don't see anything about the person. But ironically, when the person hides their naked body by putting on clothes, you actually see inside the person. Because his or her choice of those particular garments and items are making a statement. They are reflecting who this person really is. The body isn't who we really are. The body is like a little Pez candy dispenser until the soul pops out at the end of the ride. But it's really about who our soul is, and the only way the soul comes out, ironically, the only way to reveal the soul is to hide the body with the dress. So therefore, modesty is not just about clothing. Modesty is about a state of being. You could almost say that the primary raison d'etre, that's not Ezra's raisins, that means like the purpose of life, is that a person should fear God. A person should be humble. A person should have the tikkun, the rectification of the original sin, which is one word: appreciation. Everything is about appreciation. I'll tell you to this in one breath. I have so much I don't want to digress. But I'll just tell you, if you look at the Talmud is the paintbrush stroke of all of life. Zroim is about food. The first function is survival. After you have survival, moed, time, passage of time, day and night, seasons, all the rest of it. How do you function? Now you have space, you have time, you have immortality, nashim, homes, children, family. How do those family units interact with each other? Society, that's nezikin. What happens if your car damages my fence? How do we create a government? Well, what's the purpose of our government? Kutchim, Beit HaMikdash, purpose, focus, right? Manifest destiny. And then the last is, what was it all about? Tahara, purity, reaching that level. And that flow of life, there's one Gemara of all of them that's completely out of whack. And that's the very first Gemara, which is blessings, brachot. It should be the last Gemara of Zroim. Because it's only after you harvest all your food do you then say, what bracha do I make? The answer is no. Because the essence of a bracha is to appreciate. And if you don't have that, you won't have life. So therefore, Talmud begins with appreciation. Once you have that, then you will understand the bracha, the blessing of life. You'll have everything. But without that, the person, God forbid, will have nothing. So therefore, the ability to go into any relationship, especially the most important relationship, which is you and yourself, begins with modesty. Modesty of personality, modesty of speech, modesty of not showing off. I'm not a rabbi, as I tell you, I work in the business world, and sometimes in my environments, people they want to press you, so they're like dropping names. So on a few occasions I said, oh excuse me, I think you dropped a name. Right? So it's about being modest, and that modesty is the root of everything. And now, just to tell you, the Gemara Machos, again, I'll just say this as a side point. Anybody who would like, I can get, Reb Aaron can give you my email. I can give you specifically the sources in the Gemara, but I find it's tedious to start, explain. So I just give you the Gemara names, and we're going to do a lot of Gemaras. Gemara Machot says clearly that modesty is not a simple dress code, it is a lifestyle. In the Gemara Baba Metzia, it says that from the modesty of Sarah, the Talmud says that a wife's modesty endears her to her husband. Now the modesty doesn't necessarily, again, mean about dressing. The modesty, as we will see later, that the essence of a marriage is the woman. That's why the term home and the term woman, or wife rather, is interchangeable by many of the Tanoim. They call their wives my house. So that idea of the woman is that she is the elevated spiritual entity through which the guideline of what a home can be. She's the pilot. And so therefore her modesty means really her love of God through the humbleness and exuberating that appreciation of what life is. That is the inspiration that can really draw a man. And more than that, the Gemara Baba Batra says that the divine presence only lives among the modest. So suddenly modesty is not merely to be religious. Modesty is really the key to which one can be close to God. It's almost, the Gemara elsewhere, which is not relevant to this class, but I always have I look for John Wayne sources in the Talmud. And John Wayne's famous line in one of his cowboy movies is, "This town ain't big enough for the two of us." Well, that's actually the Gemara. So the Gemara says that God comes over to a person who's filled with ego and says, "This body isn't big enough for the two of us." So if we're filled with ourselves, there's no room for God. So therefore, that modesty creates the personality which allows the divine presence to dwell within us, which is really the bottom line. Because married, schmarried, you're born alone, you die alone. You go up to God alone. There's nobody else. When God says, "Why did you do that?" Because He's not there anymore. There's nobody to blame. It's easy to kind of wade through life blaming people while you're alive, but they're gone after 120. It's just the king and I. And so at that moment, it's really about the honesty of who you are in your being. And that honesty is how you dwelt with God in this world. The Gemara Nida goes a little further, and it says, right, so fine. So in the modesty, again, we're going to start segueing towards porn and getting towards love, but I'll just start with this very beautiful Gemara. The Gemara says that when it came time for privacy in the most intimacy of a husband and a wife, the Gemara says that the rabbis were so machpid, were so careful about modesty in the moments of intimacy that they would even clean the insects out of the room first. That it should just be really alone, one with one's wife, one with one's husband, one with one's God. Because we know that when a child is born or created, there are the three partners that make this one Kedushin. There's the husband, the wife, and God. So therefore, even like the little fly on the wall, I guess you might say, shouldn't be there to be involved in that. The Gemara Nida also says that, sorry, one second. Right. Okay, this is the halacha, but it's just the terminology of the Talmud so beautiful. Unfortunately, in many, or not fortunately, whatever, in other societies and so on, especially on the silver screen in Hollywood, often there's an association of the candlelit romance. In Jewish world, it's actually a mitzvah to have intimacy where there's no source of light whatsoever. That it's a complete dark environment. And the Gemara says that one of the reasons of this is that, God forbid, the husband should see something in his wife that's off-putting, and it would distance himself from her. So the Talmud says that darkness in the room at the moment of making love is a fulfillment of the mitzvah, v'ahavta l'recha komocha. That making the room dark, showing one's wife that love and that respect for her privacy and her modesty, even in a moment of total intimacy, is actually showing that which is, as Rabbi Akiva says, the klal gadol of all of the Torah. Now the interesting thing is in terms of porn. I know that probably none of you are familiar with that, but I'll just let you know, somehow or another it's a $1 trillion industry. So not quite sure how that happens, because you always ask people what do you know about porn and so on. Of course, there's always that embarrassing moment when you go over to your friend's house and say, "Can I just log on and look at my emails?" And whoo, sorry, right? Oh yeah, no, somebody else was here before you was right. So anyhow, but the point is, I want to address it because, as I said, I'm not a rabbi, and I just kind of live in the same world that you live in, and I figured that the ultimate level of holiness is to live in the world we're living in, to bring the Torah here, not there, here, to bring it down to this world as a Kodesh Baruch Hu wants it to be. So therefore we have to ask ourselves, why is porn so prevalent and so popular? I mean, I spent a lot of my years in high tech, and every time there's a new technology, the first cutting edge of this technology is how it's used for porn. Well, what is this all about? So I'm going to reveal what the Zohar says about porn. Zohar says that the first commandment in creation is to be fruitful and multiply. I got the multiply part bad because I'm really not good at math, but the fruitful part, at least I was able to do that. But Pirivia, to recreate, was the first thing God said to creation. By the way, my other line I always love is like, what's the first thing God said to Noah? You know, I mean, just think about Noah. That was a Shoah, right? Noah, so the whole world wiped out. And according to the Zohar, there was a window that God held Noah's face in the window, so he actually saw everybody drowning. Like he couldn't escape their pain, you know. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm in Miami. I don't know anything about Intifada, right? So he had to see the pain. He had to live the pain. He had to know what was going on. And now all of a sudden, the animal, lion bit him. All these things just imagine the smell. Okay. Finally, after a long time, the doors open up, creak, mud, steam, the whole thing, desolation. And of course, like the Christians would do it, they'd have that little piercing sunlight coming through the cloud on him, right? So what was the first thing God said to Noah? He said, now that I have your undivided attention. Because sometimes when we don't want to hear God, God will clear everything. Just because God wants your attention. And so therefore, what is God's attention that he wants from us? The first thing was about being creative. One form of creativity is having children. It's not the only form of creativity. Creativity is about building, it's about living, it's about being original. I went to a conference last week, somebody said something beautiful. He said, every person in this world is born original. But most people die as copies. So when we understand that God made us to be originals, this is the power of creativity. Creativity, chas v'shalom, is not opposite the Torah, it's the demand of the Torah. So creativity is about making mistakes, it's about learning the hard way, but it's about never giving up and continuing to grow and always reaching for the next step and always realizing that someday you will say, Gamzel l'tova, this was also for the best, even if it's very impossible to understand that at this moment in our lives. So this is the creativity that God said, go and be creative. So the Zohar says, because this is the central focus point, sexuality, this will be where the Yetzer Hara will strike the hardest. This is where the darkness is going to come. This is where you could meet in bars, full-grown men and no women around, and they're talking like, he, kaki, pee, wee. What? But this is how people talk. Hello, Earth, yes, I'm here. Right? This is how people are. Why? Why is that funny? Why is that even cute? Where does it come from? It comes from an immaturity of people who are not really growing up. By the way, I don't know if you noticed, but that's why this class is called for immature audiences only. Right? I think it's so very unfair. Every time you go to the movies, it's for mature audiences only. I guess you gotta leave. Right? So, immature audiences, that's the good guys, the immature people. Why? Because if we recognize it, that our immaturity on sexual issues, then we'll be able to extract the wholesome, healthy part of sexuality. We will have sexually healthy and vibrant living lives, and all of the yuck that's coming from other cultures, or all of the distortions that have seeped into our world can be removed. But unless we address it and we face it and we look at it, this becomes a really serious challenge. The other aspect the Zohar also says that just like it was the first commandment of the Torah, Sof Maaseh Machshav Tchila, the Yetzer Hara for immorality will be the ultimate running rapid right before Mashiach comes. It'll be a complete deterioration of all moral, ethical values. Of course, none of us see any of that today, but we know that someday this might actually be upon us. Tosfos in Sanhedrin, just to slam dunk this another direction, Tosfos in Sanhedrin says that it's actually called disgraceful for women that men should stare at them. The Gemara in Sanhedrin adds more. Talmud says that staring at a woman's private parts will actually make a man impotent. And so therefore it's really important to understand how we sanctify these aspects of our lives. We refer to that aspect of a woman with the name of God called makom, which means the place. The only other phrase where this is referred to besides God's name is the Beit HaMikdash, because the woman's body is the Beit HaMikdash. And just like the Holy of Holies brings life into the world, she has the apparatus to bring life into this world. She is more God's partner than man. And so therefore, God forbid, this was the whole problem of the Chet of the Egel, that they sat there and they stared into the divine presence, last week's Parsha, into Mount Sinai. This is a terrible thing when they opened up the Holy of Holies in the Beit HaMikdash and they dealt with it as if it was chol. And this is our challenge, to sanctify, to elevate, not to be religious, but to be holy, to really be WHOLLY, to understand our needs of our soul, the needs of our body, and to realize that all of this is godly. The Gemara, actually, this was sort of just not to be too heavy, but I thought this was cute. The Gemara actually gives you like ancient porn. So there's a Gemara in Sanhedrin that says there was one of the queens of Israel, Queen Jezebel, Jezebel in English, right? Anyhow. So it says that she placed 2 statues of whores on her husband's chariot to help him overcome his frigid nature. So this sounds kind of wild, right? And again, I'm not sure the Gemara was endorsing that. I mean, maybe it could be like a new thing when you get your, Lexus with 2 little... Anyhow, but the idea is a very deep idea. And I'll tell you, a psak I once heard from one of the Gedolim of our recent generation about a particular man who no longer was sexually attracted to women, and he was given a psak to go to a prostitute in order that that activity should reignite the love of a woman. I was once on the beach with Reb Shach, Zechron Bracha, and I overheard this with my own ears, and somebody was saying to the Rav, he said, look, I grew up in a non-religious environment. Going to a mixed beach never bothered me. Why do I always have to come here to the men's beach? And the Rav said to him, says, really? What's your name? He says, I don't remember the name, Moshe. He says, and what's your mother's name? My mother's name? He says, yeah, what's your mother's name? He says, Ruth. He says, Moshe ben Ruth? He says, yeah, why? He says, because I want to say a prayer for you. You should have a refuah shleima. You tell me you go to a mixed beach and it doesn't bother you? That's not healthy. It should bother you. You should be alive. You should be a man. You should feel. You should be attracted to women. And therefore, you should know how to control yourself, how to channel that, how to become more of who you are. By the way, it's a little side point, only because I heard it this week. It was a really cute joke. It wasn't a joke, actually. Somebody said it's a true story. He said that there was a non-religious Israeli from one of the consulates in Europe, and he was in the synagogue, and they called him up for an aliyah. Had no idea what an aliyah was, had never been in a synagogue his whole life. And so they yelled over to him, and they said to him, he said, what's your name? And he yells, Yuri. He says, Yuri ben Ma. He says, Shloshim v'sheish. Anyhow, I thought that was kind of cute. Tov. So now we're going to move to love. So this is a really interesting thing. If you ever go to Sheva Brachas, they've always, I call there's certain Devar Torahs that are 101. It's kind of like when the minute the rabbi or whoever is giving this Devar Torah, everybody there is helping the words because everybody knows this, right? So what's the 101? I'm going to bring it to the 2.0, so don't worry. What's the 101? Woo! What's the difference between the word man and woman? I know. One has an extra yud and one has an extra hey. Woohoo! And what does that spell? God. What does that spell? Oh, sorry. So you put those 2 letters together, right? That's God. So when man and woman each one brings the yud and one brings the hey, they bring God. And without it, there's only fire, right? Eish HaTorah. So what happens when you have that yud and you have that hey? How does that come together? So that is only half of the Devar Torah. The other half of the Devar Torah, which is far more interesting, but of course no one in the room is over the age of 18, so no one would ever say this, is where's the rest of God's name? Where's the Vav and the Hey? Well, the male body brings the Vav, and the female body brings the Hey. So what happens when you have a male body connected with a female body, but there's no godliness? It becomes, the bodies are the altar, and the fire is the fire of idolatry. It's not the fire of godliness. It's only when the male soul brings the yud, the female soul brings the hey, connects with a male body of a vav and a female body of a hey, that you really create yud k vav k in this world. What an amazing opportunity. I mean, just think about that. I don't want to be crude or rude, or maybe I already was, too late, but I just want to say, God forbid to be in the middle of intimacy and the only thing both people are thinking of, oh, I hope I'm not pregnant. Whoa, what's that? Right? Here you have, wow, I hope I'm pregnant. Wow, I hope we built something. wow, we can create something and become like God's name in this world together. That's awesome. It's really amazing. It's amazing. And it's given to us as a gift for such an incredible opportunity. So therefore I want to say that even though people say, because everyone likes to quote the Zohar, that when God created Adam and Eve, it was really as one entity, and they were back to back, and then they were severed and rejoined, it is not two sides of the same coin. In fact, the Talmud says that male and female are not even the same species. They're different species. As if that was hard. I need a Talmud to tell me that, right? Anyhow, sometimes, you learn simple stuff in the Talmud. But the beauty of it is that together they create one. So therefore, it's really a myth. I think in mathematics it's also a myth, that 1 plus 1 does not equal 2. The correct mathematics would be 1 plus 1 equals only 1 plus 1. 1 plus 1 is less than 2, because 2 as a collective entity is greater than merely a 1 and a 1. So therefore, the male-female 1 plus 1 doesn't simply create 2, or in this case 1. Male-female 1 plus 1 creates the ultimate 1, capital O. It is the one that God has in mind. So therefore, it's actually a question of different species coming together. By the way, just coming back to that point about intimacy, now I'm going to run through some of the Gemaras on this subject till we run to the next subject. The Gemara of Avodah Zarah says that Talmud wants to let you know that having intimacy between a husband and a wife does not always have to be about having children. Right? Obviously, if a woman's pregnant and so on, but it's really that the idea of intimacy is the idea of people who are together as one, committed to each other, and caring and giving for each other. I remember a story when I was first becoming, I don't want to use the word Baal Tshuva, because my Rebbe said I'm not a Baal Tshuva, I'm a Baal Vera. I just simply went from like Shogate to Maisie. I didn't know what I was doing, now I know what I'm doing. I'm still doing what I was doing, so I'm still, okay, fine. I just upgraded like the Gehenna level. Whoop. But when that process was going on, I remember a certain couple, and this nouveau Bali Tshuva, they were getting, they were married actually, and they were married for a month or two, and the wife was freaking out. Like her husband was into sex. I mean, she's like, how I handle this? And once a month, oh my gosh. So she decided to take him to the rabbi. He'll give him a good whomping. So they come into this little Chassidish Rav. I used to live in Beis Israel, amazing individual. And she's, my husband's into sex. And he goes, wait, sex? Canadian. Right? So that's the attitude. The attitude is it's a blessing, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, but sanctify it. Make it something which is really worth its while. And that's why it's in such deep sensitivity. The Talmud in Baba Kama even says, we're not here to learn the halachot. Nothing here is halachically related, by the way. But, we should have a little disclaimer running on the video. However, the Gemara says that a husband is obligated to pay damages to his wife if he hurts her during intimacy. That's how sensitive sages were. I'm sure ISIS hasn't gotten to this Gemara yet.
Where is that?
Oh, okay. You got to email me because otherwise I have 500 sources. Baba Kama, but if you do, I will promise Belinda to give you the source.
Baba Kama is good.
Okay. Yeah, Baba Kama is very good. Pretty good. Baba Brazil was also pretty good. Bobo Brazil.
Baba Mice is good too.
Yeah, Baba Mice, exactly. But that's not this, Chas v'shalom. The Gemara Nida says, the Talmud makes it clear that sexual intimacy between a couple is all about being present and about really being with each other. As such, the Torah prohibits intimacy with one's wife or husband, I would imagine, if she is asleep. But the Talmud wants to know that it includes, even if she's half asleep, groggy, or dozing off, or nodding off. Because it's all about, we're going to see, we get to dating, it's all about knowing, right? Remember that biblical word begat, which nobody knew what that meant? And then you learn the Hebrew, and it was, he knew her, right? It's all about real knowing. It's really about knowing who you are with. It's not, God forbid, about a purely physical act. It's about an act of love, of people knowing each other on the deepest of levels. And that's why the Gemara also says that sexual intimacy between a couple is a very sensitive issue, Men and women by their nature approach the moment in different ways. The Gemara says that male arousal is often physical. That's why pornography is often a male sport, whereas female arousal is often emotional or spiritual. Gemara Nida ties us into the anatomy of male and female. But because a male is much more physically oriented and therefore visually oriented, again, the Gemara returns to this idea of the importance of intimacy in the dark, in order that, God forbid, there should be nothing that should ever alienate a husband from his wife, God forbid. The Gemara Nida says further that the Talmud uses different expressions for the endearment of intimacy between husband and wife. It uses the words such as, she is in a rush to get home, or it uses the words, she is serving her house, which if you think about, these are beautiful, beautiful poetic concepts that put such an endearing term of really what a home is about and what a couple can acquire and obtain in their relationships. Further, the Gemara Nida says, Talmud says that a child's destiny is created at the moment of conception. It's a very powerful and beautiful thing. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says, okay, this is kind of like, I have to always say, like, can't be too heavy, so I got to come back to like the light side of the Gary Larson side of Talmud, right? So the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that when King David, remember when King David was old and they had a beauty contest, thank you, and they brought in Abishag, and he would not have intimacy with her. So she thought that he had become impotent. And so what was her line to him? She said, when the thief loses his courage, he becomes righteous. Right? Sometimes, as opposed to really dealing with issues, we all have issues, and the things that all of us have baggage. There's nothing wrong with being mortal. That's what we were created to be. But when we really have the maturity as opposed to the immaturity to address these things, then we really have the opportunity to be able to see that sometimes we come up with a lot of holy excuses rather than the reality being maybe you're afraid of intimacy. And fear of intimacy is okay as long as you overcome it. You can't stay there because then you lose life. And that's the greatest insult to God, is to lose life, because that's the gift that God gave us. So the Gemara of Avodah Zarah says also in a kind of a quip, it says when referring to a woman's sexuality, it says that a woman should know how to use her sexuality. And it uses the term, a woman wears her weapons on her. So therefore, it's really kind of a beautiful thing that a woman is not supposed to be something that walks around under a burlap bag. A woman is supposed to be a person who's in touch and alive with who they are. And once they are alive with who they are, then that can be an inspiration to the couple, for both of them to be alive with who they are. I have to tell you one thing which, under penalty of torture, I will not expose my sources. But I have people who are my dear friends who are Satmar Hasidim in Williamsburg. And I am very close and tight with some of these guys. And what I've discovered is, you know Victoria's Secrets? Do you know that it sells well in Brooklyn? But it doesn't sell well, God forbid, to appear in a TV ad commercial. It appears, you see these women in the street, you they're like, you know, no, flatline. But then, when it comes to sharing with their husbands and being playful and alive, this is the beauty. This is the beauty of what it really is. And this is people who really understand closeness to God, can understand, experience this in a very healthy way. In a non-healthy way, we now move to the next section called love sickness. The Gemara of Avodah Zarah says, which I kind of find it's sort of cute, the Talmud says, it is clear that a person is never too busy not to have sex. Right? Let's get that. Like, there's always room for dessert, right? And there's always time for sex. That's just the way people are, and that's okay. We got to be aware of that. The Gemara in Sanhedrin goes on and says, amazing story. There was a battle between doctors and rabbis over saving a man's life or violating the Torah. The Gemara says that there was a man who was so in love with a married woman, note the word married, so in love with a married woman, not his own wife, obviously, that he became sick to the point of dying. The doctor said, whoa, let him sleep with her. That'll save his life. And the rabbi said, better to die. Right? This is one of the 3 cardinal sins in Judaism and so on. But the point here is not better to leave him to die. Although, can you turn that off for a minute so I can tell a bad joke? No, I'm just kidding. Everybody, I shouldn't do this, but I can't resist. Oh, my Yitzhahara has me, sorry. But you know this joke about this guy's like really ill and he comes to the doctor and like the doctor comes and says, Mrs. Rosenberg, maybe I should talk to you privately, and they go off and you know this one the doctor says to her, he says, look, your husband, he's a goner. He's finished. There's only one possible way you can pull him out. Really? What? Every night, homemade dinner, you gotta be dressed up beautiful, the house is gotta be spotless, anything he wants, do it for him, and he'll live. They come out, obviously Mr. Rosenberg's freaked, runs to his wife, says to his wife, what did the doctor say? Well, you're gonna die. Anyhow. However, now why are we laughing? That's really the question. Okay. However, the point here is that is the idea. This like love, sickness, to the point of death. And the Gemara goes further on this. Also in Sanhedrin, the Gemara says that on the day that Pinchas killed Zimri, Zimri had 424 intimacies with the daughter of Bill Cosby. And then it says, after 60 intimacies, it describes what happened to their actual anatomy, to the point where it's no longer, I won't go into that now, because there are some people here under the age of 90. So, but the point of it is sickness, where sexuality can become sickness. Baba Metzia, the Gemara says, a man who dies from too much sex with women. It's the Gemara. Hello, Gemara, right? I'm sure you learned this when you went to yeshiva. Right? It says, a man who dies with too much sex with women is not worthy of being called a man. Just like a cat who dies from eating too many rats, or who is killed by a gang of rats.